Everyone in the private wing knew the baby belonged to the kind of family that makes hospitals obey. Still, the child kept shrinking, week after week, while every monitor insisted everything was fine. Heartbeat steady, oxygen perfect, labs clean. Cameras showed only sleep. Yet the morning weigh-ins told a different story. Smaller clothes, hollower cheeks, a silence that felt heavier than the guards outside the door. On a late shift, a nurse stopped trusting numbers and listened. Beneath the soft hum of machines came another sound, a faint rhythmic sip like liquid moving where it shouldn't. The feeding pump was set correctly, but the tubing was warm in the wrong direction. Hidden under the blanket, a near-invisible clamp diverted nutrition into a second line behind the wall. Monitors never showed sabotage, only symptoms. The nurse did, and the room finally exhaled. Outside, the corridor went still, as if even power had learned fear. The mahogany doors of Mount Sinai's private wing whispered shut behind Dr. Evelyn Carter as she stepped into the sterile brightness of the corridor. The scent of industrial disinfectant couldn't mask the underlying smell of desperation that seemed to cling to these walls, the kind that money couldn't scrub away. Her worn sneakers squeaked against polished marble floors that probably cost more than her annual salary, each step a reminder that she didn't belong here. The attending physician's words still echoed in her ears. Another failed case. Carter, the DeLuca infant. 8 months old, continuous weight loss despite normal feeding patterns. We've run every test in the book. His tone had been dismissive, almost bored, as if discussing a minor equipment malfunction rather than a dying baby. Evelyn paused at the elevator bank, her reflection staring back from the polished steel doors. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, 36 hours into a brutal shift rotation, and her pager had been silent for exactly 14 minutes. In her experience, silence meant trouble was brewing somewhere else. She pressed the call button with more force than necessary. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, and she stepped inside alongside Dr. Marcus Webb, one of Mount Sinai's most celebrated pediatric specialists. His Italian leather shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his cologne, something expensive and subtle, filled the small space between them. "Heard you were reviewing the DeLuca case," Webb said without looking at her, his fingers drumming against his briefcase. "Waste of time, if you ask me. Sometimes these rich families create problems where none exist. Anxiety, overprotective tendencies. The baby's probably fine." Evelyn's jaw tightened. 8 months old, failing to thrive despite adequate caloric intake. That's not anxiety, Dr. Webb. That's a medical emergency. Webb's laugh was cold, condescending. "Carter, you're what? 3 years out of residency, still paying off student loans while working double shifts at the community clinic?" He finally turned to face her, his pale blue eyes scanning her wrinkled scrubs and tired expression. "The DeLuca family has access to the best medical minds in the city. If we can't solve it, what makes you think some overworked resident from Queens can make a difference?" The elevator jerked to a stop on the 15th floor, and Webb stepped out without another word. But his parting glance, a mixture of pity and amusement, burned into Evelyn's memory. She watched the doors close, her hands trembling slightly as she pressed the button for the parking garage. 20 minutes later, Evelyn sat in her battered Honda Civic in the hospital parking garage, staring at her phone. Claire's medical bills spread across her dashboard like a paper avalanche. Experimental treatments, specialist consultations, medications not covered by insurance. The numbers blurred together into an impossible sum that grew larger every week. Her phone buzzed. Sofia Delgado. The name meant nothing to her, but the area code suggested Manhattan's Upper East Side. "Dr. Carter." The voice was heavily accented, urgent, almost whispered. "My name is Sofia. I work for the DeLuca family as their baby's caregiver." "How did you get this number?" "I have friend who works at the community clinic. She say you are good doctor, real doctor, not like the others." Sophia's breathing was rapid, anxious. "Please, Dr. Carter, something is wrong with baby Nico. Very wrong, but not what the hospital doctors think." Evelyn leaned back against her headrest, exhaustion weighing down her eyelids. Ms. Delgado, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not affiliated with the family's medical care. You should speak with— No! Sophia's voice cracked. They don't see it. The fancy doctors, they look at numbers, at tests. They don't see what happens in the house. At night, when the cameras— Her voice dropped to barely audible. When the cameras stop working. Something in Sophia's tone made Evelyn sit up straighter. In her years of emergency medicine, she'd learned to recognize genuine fear, not the manufactured panic of anxious parents, but the bone-deep terror of someone who'd witnessed something they couldn't explain. What exactly are you asking me to do? Come to the house just once, look at baby Nico yourself. Not in hospital, not with all the machines and white coats. Look at him in his room where he lives every day. Sophia's voice became pleading. I know this sounds crazy, but I think someone is making him sick, on purpose. Evelyn's grip tightened on the phone. That's a very serious accusation. I know, but I cannot prove, and I cannot make them listen to me. I am just the nanny, just the help. Sophia's words carried years of invisibility, of being overlooked and dismissed. But you are doctor. You have authority. Maybe you can see what I cannot explain. Through her windshield, Evelyn watched expensive cars pull out of the parking garage, Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas, each one worth more than she'd earn in 2 years. Webb's words echoed in her mind. What makes you think some overworked resident from Queens can make a difference? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Give me the address, Evelyn said, already reaching for a pen. As Sophia recited the Upper East Side location, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to step into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple medical consultation. But Claire's face appeared in her mind, pale, fighting, depending on treatments Evelyn couldn't afford, and the decision crystallized. Sometimes the most important cases were the ones nobody wanted to see. Hello there, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Hit like and comment what you thought of the story and tell us the city you're watching from. Let's keep going. The DeLuca mansion rose from Fifth Avenue like a fortress of old money and older secrets. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk, craning her neck to take in the limestone facade that stretched 5 stories above her, each window gleaming with the kind of perfection that required an army of invisible hands to maintain. The autumn air carried the scent of expensive tobacco from a cigar being smoked somewhere in Central Park, mixing with the faint aroma of fresh bread from a nearby bakery that probably charged $50 for a loaf. A wrought iron gate, black as midnight and twice as imposing, separated her from the stone steps leading to the front entrance. She pressed the intercom button, her medical bag feeling suddenly inadequate in her grip. State your business. The voice was male, accented, Eastern European, maybe Russian. Dr. Evelyn Carter. Sophia Delgado called me about the DeLuca baby. A pause. Then the mechanical whir of the gate unlocking. Evelyn walked up the steps, her footsteps echoing against stone that felt older than the city itself. Before she could reach for the brass doorbell, the massive wooden door swung open to reveal a man who seemed carved from the same unforgiving material as the mansion's facade. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes the color of winter steel. Dr. Carter, I am Marek Sokolov, head of security. His handshake was firm but brief. You will follow me. You will speak only when spoken to. You will not photograph anything. You will not discuss anything you see or hear with anyone outside this house. He stepped aside, and Evelyn entered a foyer that belonged in a museum. Crystal chandeliers caught the afternoon light, streaming through stained glass windows, casting rainbow fragments across marble floors so polished they reflected her scuffed shoes back at her. The scent here was different, beeswax and roses, with an underlying note of something medicinal that made her think of expensive hospitals. This way. Marek led her through corridors lined with oil paintings, whose subjects seemed to watch their passage with disapproving eyes. Persian rugs muffled their footsteps, and the walls themselves seemed to absorb sound, creating a hush so complete that Evelyn could hear her own heartbeat. She noticed the cameras, small, discreet, positioned at every corner and doorway. Someone was watching everything always. They passed what appeared to be a library, its shelves reaching toward a coffered ceiling, leather-bound volumes arranged with mathematical precision. A sitting room followed, furnished with antiques that probably cost more than her medical degree. Everything was beautiful, everything was perfect, everything felt utterly lifeless. "The rules," Marek said without turning around as they climbed a curved staircase. "You do not wander. You do not ask questions about the family's personal business. You do not make eye contact with Mr. DeLuca unless he addresses you directly. You are here to examine the child, nothing more." At the top of the stairs, they encountered a woman descending, tall, elegant, with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. Her dress was cream-colored silk that probably cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent, and her blue eyes were sharp as broken glass. This had to be Isabella DeLuca. "Marek." Isabella's voice carried the slight accent of European finishing schools. "Who is this person?" "Dr. Carter, here to examine the baby." Isabella's gaze swept over Evelyn from head to toe, taking in the practical shoes, the off-the-rack blazer, the medical bag that had seen better years. Her expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "Another one." Isabella sighed delicately. "I do hope this won't take long. Nico needs his routine maintained, not disrupted by every doctor in the city poking at him." She continued down the stairs, her heels clicking against marble in a rhythm that seemed deliberately dismissive. The scent of her perfume lingered, something French and expensive that made Evelyn's nose itch. "She doesn't like doctors," Marek observed as they continued down the hallway. "Does anyone in this family?" Marek's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested the question had hit closer to truth than comfort. They stopped outside a door painted soft blue, with brass hardware that gleamed despite the hallway's dim lighting. Sofia Delgado emerged as if she'd been waiting just inside, her dark eyes bright with relief at seeing Evelyn. "Doctor, thank God you came." Sofia was perhaps 40, with greying hair pulled back in a practical bun, and hands that showed the wear of honest work. Her uniform was crisp but simple, the kind of clothing designed to make its wearer fade into the background. "He is sleeping now, but what?" Sofia glanced at Marek, who had positioned himself beside the door like a sentinel. "Maybe it's better you see for yourself." The nursery was a study in expensive taste and careful planning. The walls were painted a soothing sage green, with hand-painted murals of woodland creatures that probably cost more than most people's cars. A crib, made of what looked like antique mahogany, sat in the center of the room, surrounded by furniture that belonged in a luxury hotel suite rather than a baby's room. But it was the baby himself that made Evelyn's breath catch. Nico DeLuca lay in his crib, 8 months old but appearing smaller, frailer than he should. His skin had a translucent quality that spoke of poor nutrition, and even in sleep, his breathing seemed labored. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his tiny fists were clenched, as if even unconsciousness brought no peace. "How long has he been like this?" Evelyn whispered, instinctively lowering her voice in the presence of such fragility. 2 months, maybe more. Sofia moved to the crib's side, her movements gentle, practiced. It started slow. First he ate less, then he stopped gaining weight. Now. She gestured helplessly at the monitors beside the crib. Heart rate, breathing, temperature, all within normal ranges but somehow wrong. Evelyn set down her medical bag and approached the crib. The baby's room smelled of talcum powder and something else, something antiseptic that didn't belong in a nursery. As she leaned closer, Nico's eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face with an intensity that seemed unnatural for an infant his age. For just a moment, those dark eyes seemed to hold a weight of knowledge no baby should possess, as if he understood exactly what was happening to him and exactly how powerless he was to stop it. The moment passed. Nico's eyes drifted closed again, and he was simply a sick baby in an expensive room, surrounded by people who claimed to love him. But in that brief connection, Evelyn had seen something that chilled her more than Isabella's dismissive stare or Marek's intimidating presence. She had seen fear. The voice that cut through the nursery's hushed atmosphere carried the weight of absolute authority. "Who authorized this intrusion?" Evelyn straightened, turning to face the doorway where a man now stood, tall, imposing, with dark hair touched by silver at the temples and eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they surveyed. This could only be Salvatore De Luca. His suit was perfectly tailored, probably custom-made in Italy, and he wore it like armor. The scent of expensive cologne and something sharper, ambition perhaps or barely contained power, preceded him into the room. "Mr. De Luca," Sophia began, but he silenced her with a raised hand. "I wasn't speaking to you." His gaze fixed on Evelyn, and she felt the full force of his scrutiny. "Dr. Carter, Evelyn Carter." She kept her voice steady, despite the way his presence seemed to fill the room, making the expensive nursery feel suddenly cramped. "Dr. Carter." He repeated her name as if testing its worth and finding it wanting. "From which institution? Mount Sinai, NYU Langone? Surely someone of your obvious expertise comes with impressive credentials." The pause before expertise was deliberate, cutting. Evelyn recognized the technique. She'd seen it used on medical students by attending physicians who enjoyed demonstrating their power. But this wasn't a hospital, and she wasn't a student. "I'm affiliated with several institutions," she replied carefully. "Most recently, I've been working at the East Harlem Health Center." Salvatore's eyebrows rose slightly. "East Harlem? How community-minded of you." He stepped into the nursery, and Marek moved aside to give him space, a choreographed deference that spoke of long practice. "Tell me, Dr. Carter, what exactly did Sophia promise you? Money? Perhaps she mentioned that my family is generous with medical professionals who show initiative?" Heat flushed Evelyn's cheeks. "She didn't promise me anything. She asked me to examine your son because she's concerned about his condition." Concerned. Salvatore approached the crib, looking down at Nico with an expression that might have been fondness or might have been disappointment. It was impossible to tell. "The most expensive pediatric specialists in the city have examined my son. Dr. Marcus Webb, whom I'm sure you know by reputation, has personally overseen his care. The finest minds, the most advanced equipment, unlimited resources." His gaze shifted back to Evelyn. "What exactly do you think you can offer that they cannot?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sophia shifted uncomfortably beside the crib, her eyes darting between Evelyn and her employer. Marek remained motionless by the door, but Evelyn could feel his attention focused on the conversation with predatory intensity. "Sometimes," Evelyn said slowly, "the problem isn't what we're not seeing, it's what we're choosing not to look at." Salvatore's laugh was soft, dangerous. "Interesting theory. Tell me, Dr. Carter, do you play chess?" The non sequitur threw her. Occasionally." "Then you understand the concept of sacrifice. Pawns particularly serve a specific purpose. They're expendable pieces used to protect more valuable assets." He moved closer to her, and she caught the scent of his cologne again, mixed with something metallic that might have been adrenaline. "In my experience, when pawns begin to think they're queens, they tend to make catastrophic errors in judgment." "I'm not sure I follow your metaphor, Mr. De Luca." "No?" His smile was sharp as a blade. "Then let me be more direct. You're here because my employee, my domestic staff, contacted you without authorization. You've entered my home, examined my child, and now you stand in my nursery as if you have some right to be here." He paused, letting the words settle. "You have 30 minutes to justify your presence. Examine my son. Tell me something the experts haven't. Prove that you're worth the air you're breathing in my house." Sophia's face went pale. "Mr. De Luca, please, I only thought—" "You thought incorrectly." He didn't look at her, keeping his attention focused on Evelyn like a laser. 30 minutes, Dr. Carter. Impress me, or remove yourself from my property and never return." Evelyn felt the trap closing around her. This wasn't a medical consultation. It was a performance, a demonstration of power designed to humiliate her in front of the staff. Salvatore De Luca was a man accustomed to breaking people who challenged his authority, and he was using his sick son as the arena for this particular contest. But as she looked down at Nico, still sleeping fitfully in his expensive crib, something hardened in her chest. This wasn't about her pride or Salvatore's ego. This was about a baby who was failing to thrive while the adults around him played power games. "Fine," she said, opening her medical bag. 30 minutes. She began with the basics, checking Nico's temperature, heart rate, breathing, all within normal parameters, just as the hospital records had indicated. But as she worked, she found herself paying attention to details that wouldn't show up on standard tests. The way Nico's body tensed when she touched certain areas, the slight tremor in his hands that could indicate neurological issues or nutritional deficiencies, the way his eyes tracked movement, alert, intelligent, but somehow wary. "He's been eating normally?" she asked Sophia, who nodded quickly. "Every 4 hours, just like the schedule says, sometimes more if he seems hungry. And sleeping? Not so good lately. He wakes up crying, but not like normal baby crying. Like—" Sophia struggled for words. "Like he's frightened." Evelyn glanced at Salvatore, who was watching her work with the intensity of a hawk observing a field mouse. She could feel him evaluating every move, every question, waiting for her to make a mistake he could pounce on. She lifted Nico gently, supporting his head as she examined his mouth and throat. The baby's eyes opened again, fixing on her face with that same unnaturally intense stare. And in that moment, she caught something the expensive equipment had missed, a faint, sweet smell on his breath that didn't belong there. "When was his last feeding?" she asked, still holding the baby's gaze. Sophia checked her watch. 2 hours ago. He took about 4 ounces. Formula or breast milk? Formula. Mrs. DeLuca. She doesn't. Sophia trailed off, glancing nervously at Salvatore. "My wife finds breastfeeding inconvenient," Salvatore said coldly. "The formula is specifically designed for infants with sensitive digestion, imported from Switzerland, the finest available." Evelyn nodded, still focused on Nico. The sweet smell was faint but persistent, and there was something about it that nagged at her medical instincts. She'd smelled something similar before, but couldn't quite place where. "Has anyone else been feeding him recently? Besides Sophia?" "The night nurse comes 3 times a week," Sophia said, "and Mrs. DeLuca sometimes helps with the evening feeding." "Sometimes?" Salvatore's voice cut in sharply. "Dr. Carter, your time is running short. Do you have a diagnosis, or are you simply fishing for information you're not entitled to possess?" Evelyn carefully placed Nico back in his crib, her mind racing. The baby's symptoms, the sweet smell, the pattern of weight loss, pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite assemble. But she'd learned something important in the last 30 minutes, something that had nothing to do with medical charts or test results. Someone in this house was lying. "Your son isn't dying of neglect, Mr. DeLuca," she said finally, turning to face him. "He's failing to thrive because someone is making sure he fails." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Salvatore's expression went from calculating to dangerous in an instant. "That," he said very quietly, "is a very serious accusation. I hope you're prepared to back it up with more than intuition and wishful thinking." Evelyn met his stare without flinching. "Give me more than 30 minutes, and I will." The silence that followed Evelyn's accusation stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Salvatore DeLuca stood motionless, his dark eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that would have made a lesser person retreat. But Evelyn had spent years in emergency rooms, where life and death decisions hinged on split-second judgments, and she recognized the moment when retreat meant surrender. "You have 48 hours, Salvatore said finally, his voice carrying the weight of a business deal being negotiated. Not as a guest, not as a consultant, but as a member of this household's staff. You will observe my son's care, his feeding schedule, his medical routine. You will document everything, and at the end of 48 hours, you will present me with evidence, real evidence, or you will never set foot in this house again." Sophia's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet room. Marek shifted position slightly, his hand moving instinctively toward something concealed beneath his jacket. Even Nico seemed to sense the tension, stirring restlessly in his crib. "What exactly are you offering?" Evelyn asked, though she already knew she was going to accept. Claire's medical bills flashed through her mind. The experimental treatments, the specialists, the crushing weight of hope measured in dollars she didn't have. Room, board, and a consulting fee that will cover whatever financial pressures brought you to my door. Salvatore's smile was sharp as winter ice. I'm not a foolish man, Dr. Carter. People don't risk their careers for strangers unless they're desperate. Sophia mentioned your sister needs medical care. The casual mention of Claire hit like a physical blow. Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides. How do you... I make it my business to know who enters my home and why. He pulled out a slim phone, touched the screen briefly. Claire Carter, age 26, diagnosed with fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. Experimental treatments at Johns Hopkins. Current medical debt approaching $200,000. He looked up from the screen. Devastating disease. Tragic that insurance doesn't cover the only therapies showing promise. The casual cruelty of using Claire's condition as leverage made Evelyn's vision blur with rage. But beneath the anger, her medical mind was already working, analyzing the pieces Salvatore had just revealed. He'd had her investigated, thoroughly, quickly, professionally. That level of background research didn't happen in the few hours since Sophia's call. Someone had been watching her, preparing for this moment. You planned this, she said. The whole thing. Sophia's call, my coming here, it's all been orchestrated. Salvatore's expression didn't change. Did I? Or did you simply prove yourself predictable? He moved to the nursery window, gazing out at Central Park with the air of a man who owned whatever he surveyed. 48 hours, Dr. Carter. Find your evidence, or find your way out. 3 hours later, Evelyn sat in a guest room that cost more to furnish than most people's homes, trying to process what she'd agreed to. Her overnight bag, hastily packed after a stop at her apartment, looked shabby against the antique dresser, and her laptop seemed primitive compared to the touchscreen panels that controlled everything from lighting to temperature. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Sophia entered carrying a dinner tray, her movements careful and quiet. I brought food, Sophia said, setting the tray on the writing desk. And this. She pulled a folder from beneath the cloth napkin. Nico's feeding schedule for the last month. Times, amounts, who gave the bottle, how much he took. Evelyn opened the folder, immediately noting the meticulous handwriting, the detailed observations. You kept all this? Something is wrong, Sophia said simply. I know babies. I raised 4 of my own before coming to work here. Nico. He is not sick like they say. He is being made sick. The records painted a disturbing picture, feeding amounts that varied wildly depending on who administered them. Sleep patterns that deteriorated markedly on specific days. Weight loss that accelerated after certain caregivers' shifts. But it was the pattern hidden within the chaos that made Evelyn's pulse quicken, a subtle rhythm that would be invisible to anyone not looking for it. Sophia, these night feedings, the ones marked in, what does that mean? Sophia's face tightened. Isabella. Mrs. DeLuca. Sometimes she likes to feed him herself, usually late at night when the house is quiet. Evelyn studied the chart more closely, her trained eye picking up connections that would have taken her medical school professors weeks to identify. It was a skill she'd developed during residency, the ability to see patterns in seemingly random data, to recognize the signal hidden in the noise. Her attending physicians had called it intuitive medicine, though she knew it was simply a different way of processing information. On nights when Isabella fed Nico, his weight loss accelerated. His sleep became more restless. His appetite the following day diminished significantly. The correlation wasn't perfect, it was subtle, skillfully disguised, but it was there. How long have you worked for the family? Evelyn asked. 2 years since before Nico was born. Sophia sat heavily in the chair by the window. At first everything was normal. Mrs. DeLuca she was, excited about the baby, made plans, bought things, talked about what kind of mother she would be. What changed? The pregnancy was difficult. She was sick a lot, couldn't eat, had to stay in bed for weeks. And Mr. DeLuca. He worked more, traveled more. I think she felt forgotten. Sophia's voice carried the weight of someone who'd watched a family slowly fracture. After Nico was born, she tried to breastfeed, but he wouldn't latch properly. She took it as rejection. Evelyn nodded, understanding beginning to coalesce, postpartum depression, feelings of inadequacy, a husband whose emotional distance was legendary even in his business dealings, the perfect storm for psychological breakdown. Has she ever said anything about wanting Nico to be different somehow? Sophia hesitated. Sometimes I hear her talking to him when she thinks no one is listening. She tells him he's too needy, too demanding, that babies are supposed to sleep more, cry less. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Once I heard her say she wished he would just be quiet, forever quiet. A chill ran down Evelyn's spine. She'd seen cases of Munchausen syndrome by proxy during her residency. Parents who deliberately made their children sick for attention, control, or psychological gratification. But this felt different. More calculated, more desperate. I need to observe the night feeding routine, as she said, without anyone knowing I'm watching. Is dangerous. If Mrs. DeLuca finds out, then we make sure she doesn't. Evelyn closed the folder, her mind already working through the logistics. Sophia, do you trust me? You are the first person who believes something is wrong. So yes, I trust you. Then help me save that baby. As if summoned by their conversation, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, expensive heels clicking against marble with the precision of a metronome. Isabella DeLuca's voice carried through the door, speaking to someone in rapid, agitated Italian. The words were indistinct, but the tone was unmistakable. Anger, frustration, and something darker. Something that sounded very much like resentment toward her own child. Evelyn moved to the window, watching Isabella's reflection in the glass as she passed. Beautiful, elegant, perfectly composed, and radiating the kind of controlled fury that came from years of suppressed emotion finally finding a target. In 46 hours, she would have to prove that this woman was slowly killing her own son. The clock was already ticking, and Evelyn suspected that time was running out faster than anyone realized. But for the first time since entering the DeLuca mansion, she felt something other than intimidation or uncertainty. She felt the familiar surge of diagnostic clarity that came when all the disparate pieces of a medical mystery began falling into place. Someone was indeed making Nico sick. Now she just had to prove it, without becoming a victim herself. The night feeding came at 2:17 a.m., announced by Nico's weak cries echoing through the baby monitor Sophia had discreetly placed in Evelyn's room. She slipped from beneath Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and padded barefoot across marble floors that felt like ice against her skin. The hallway outside was dimly lit by sconces that cast dancing shadows on oil paintings of long-dead DeLucas, their eyes seeming to follow her movement toward the nursery. She pressed herself against the wall beside the partially open door, listening as Isabella's voice drifted through the gap, soft, melodic, speaking in Italian to the fussing infant. The words were gentle, maternal, but something in the tone made Evelyn's skin crawl. It was the voice someone might use to soothe an animal before slaughter. Through the crack in the door, she watched Isabella move with practiced efficiency. The formula preparation was meticulous, measuring powder, testing temperature, swirling the bottle until the mixture was perfectly smooth. Nothing appeared wrong. Nothing looked suspicious. But Evelyn's trained eye caught the moment when Isabella's hand moved to something in her robe pocket, withdrawing what looked like a small dropper bottle. 3 drops into the formula. A pause, then 3 more. Evelyn's breath stopped. She pressed herself harder against the wall as Isabella stirred the bottle again, her movements careful, deliberate. When she lifted Nico from his crib, murmuring soft endearments in Italian, she looked like every mother's idealized image, beautiful, nurturing, devoted. The feeding took 20 minutes. Isabella held the bottle at precisely the right angle, supporting Nico's head with professional competence, pausing to burp him at appropriate intervals. To any observer, it would have looked like textbook infant care. But Evelyn noticed how Nico's sucking became progressively weaker, how his eyes grew heavy long before the bottle was finished, how his tiny body seemed to relax in a way that spoke more of sedation than satisfaction. When Isabella finally placed him back in the crib, she stood looking down at him for a long moment. In the soft glow of the nursery lamp, her expression was unreadable, tender and terrible at once. "Sleep now, Piccolo," she whispered. "Sleep peacefully. No more crying, No more demands, just sleep. She gathered the empty bottle and left the room, her silk robe whispering against the doorframe as she passed within inches of where Evelyn hid. The scent of her perfume lingered, jasmine and something medicinal that made Evelyn think of hospitals. Back in her room, Evelyn sat in the antique chair by the window, staring out at Central Park, while her mind raced through the implications of what she'd witnessed. The dropper bottle could have contained anything: vitamins, supplements, medication prescribed by one of Nico's many doctors. But the secretive nature of its administration, the careful timing, the way Nico had responded, it all painted a picture that made her stomach turn. She needed that bottle. She needed to know what was being added to Nico's formula. But obtaining it would require getting close to Isabella, earning her trust, becoming someone she confided in rather than merely tolerated. The next morning brought unexpected opportunity, in the form of Salvatore's summons to his private study. Evelyn found him behind a desk that could have doubled as a landing strip, surrounded by monitors displaying financial data from markets around the world. He was on a conference call with what sounded like associates in Tokyo, his voice carrying the casual authority of someone accustomed to moving billions with a word. He gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, continuing his conversation in fluent Japanese while she waited. She used the time to study him, the way he held his shoulders, the micro-expressions that crossed his face as he negotiated some complex deal, the careful control he maintained over every gesture and word. When he finally ended the call, his attention focused on her with laser intensity. "Your first night in my home," he said without preamble. "What did you observe?" It was a test within a test. He was probing to see what she'd noticed, what conclusions she was drawing, whether she was worth the investment of his time and resources. Evelyn chose her words carefully. "Your son's sleep patterns are consistent with mild sedation," she said. "His response to feeding suggests the introduction of a foreign substance that affects his neurological function without triggering obvious physical symptoms." Salvatore's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, a sharpening of focus that reminded her of a predator catching an interesting scent. "You're suggesting someone in my household is drugging my son." "I'm suggesting that Nico's symptoms are inconsistent with any organic medical condition. The pattern of his deterioration follows external factors, not internal pathology." External factors. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. Such as... This was the moment of truth. Accusing Isabella directly would end her investigation before it truly began, but dancing around the truth would convince Salvatore she was either incompetent or irrelevant. "Someone with regular access to his feeding routine," she said carefully. "Someone who has both the means and the motive to alter his formula without detection." Motive. The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. What possible motive could anyone in this house have for harming an innocent child? Evelyn met his stare directly. "That depends on what the child represents to them. A burden, a responsibility they never wanted, a rival for attention and resources." She paused, watching his reaction, or simply a way to punish someone else. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across Salvatore's face, a crack in the armor of absolute control he maintained. But it vanished so quickly she almost doubted she'd seen it. "You have 36 hours remaining," he said, his voice once again professionally neutral. "I suggest you use them wisely." That afternoon, opportunity arrived in the unexpected form of Isabella herself. Evelyn was reviewing Nico's medical files in the library when Isabella appeared in the doorway, elegant as always in a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than most people's wardrobes. "Dr. Carter." Isabella's smile was polite, distant. "I hope you're finding everything you need. Your husband has been very accommodating." Isabella moved into the library, trailing her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books that looked more decorative than functional. "Salvatore is a man who likes to be thorough, perhaps excessively so." There was something bitter in her tone. "He doesn't like mysteries, especially in his own home." "And you, do you like mysteries?" Isabella's laugh was soft, musical, and completely without warmth. "I prefer clarity, direct communication, when people say what they mean instead of hiding behind professional courtesy and medical jargon." The invitation was clear. Isabella wanted to know what Evelyn had discovered, what conclusions she was drawing, whether she represented a threat to the careful balance of power in the DeLuca household. "Your son is a beautiful child," Evelyn said carefully. "Yes, he is." Isabella settled into the chair across from her, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. "But beauty isn't everything, is it? Sometimes beautiful things require more care than they're worth, more attention than busy people can provide." There it was, the crack in the facade that Evelyn had been waiting for. Isabella's resentment wasn't hidden, it was simply wrapped in the language of sophisticated regret. "Children can be demanding," Evelyn agreed. "Demanding. Yes, that's one word for it." Isabella's eyes were distant, as if she were seeing something far beyond the library walls. "Do you have children, Dr. Carter?" "No." "Then you can't understand what it's like to have your entire life consumed by someone else's needs, to lose yourself completely in service to a tiny tyrant who gives nothing back but crying and mess and endless, endless demands." The venom in her voice was startling in its intensity. This wasn't postpartum depression. This was something deeper, more dangerous. This was a woman who had convinced herself that her infant son was the enemy. "It must be difficult," Evelyn said, "especially when you're dealing with his health issues." Isabella's expression sharpened. "What health issues? The doctors have found nothing wrong with him, nothing at all. But his weight loss, his feeding difficulties, are perfectly normal variations." Isabella's voice took on a defensive edge. "Babies go through phases. They have good days and bad days. Nico is simply sensitive. He requires careful management." Careful management. The words sent a chill through Evelyn as she realized their true meaning. Isabella wasn't just harming Nico. She was convincing herself it was for his own good. She'd created a justification system that allowed her to see sedation as care, starvation as sensitivity management. "Of course," Evelyn said. "You know him better than anyone." Isabella smiled then, and for the first time it seemed almost genuine. "Exactly. I'm his mother. I know what's best for him." She stood, smoothing her sweater. "I hope your investigation goes well, Dr. Carter. Though I suspect you'll find that sometimes the simplest explanation is the correct one. Sometimes a sick child is just sick." As Isabella left the library, Evelyn felt the full weight of what she was up against. This wasn't just child abuse, it was child abuse committed by someone who had convinced herself she was the victim. Isabella DeLuca wasn't a monster. She was something far more dangerous. She was a mother who had decided her child would be better off barely alive than fully human. And Evelyn had less than 36 hours to prove it. The crisis arrived at 6:23 a.m. in the form of Salvatore's phone, buzzing with an urgency that shattered the mansion's morning stillness. Evelyn was in the kitchen, observing Sophia prepare Nico's morning formula under the watchful eye of the New Day nurse, when she heard his voice echoing from the study. Sharp, controlled fury, wrapped in Italian expletives that needed no translation. Within minutes, the entire household was in motion. Marek appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face grim. "Dr. Carter, Mr. DeLuca wants to see you, now." She found Salvatore standing behind his desk, still in his silk pajamas and robe, staring at his laptop screen with an expression that could have melted steel. Isabella sat in one of the leather chairs, her face pale but composed, a cup of coffee trembling almost imperceptibly in her manicured hands. "Explain this," Salvatore said without looking up, turning the laptop toward Evelyn. The headline blazed across the screen in bold type: "Billionaire's baby battles mysterious illness. Sources close to DeLuca. Family reveal months of medical crisis." Below it, a photo of the DeLuca mansion, clearly taken with a telephoto lens from Central Park. The article was credited to Eliza Voss, investigative reporter for the New York Herald. Evelyn scanned the text, her medical training automatically passing the information for accuracy and implications. Someone had leaked detailed information about Nico's condition, weight loss, feeding difficulties, the parade of specialists, even the fact that a new doctor had been brought in for consultation. The article stopped short of making direct accusations, but the implications were devastating. The city's most powerful businessman couldn't even protect his own child. "I didn't speak to any reporters," Evelyn said carefully. "No," Salvatore's voice was deadly quiet. But someone did. Someone with access to medical information, household routines, family dynamics. His dark eyes fixed on her. Someone who's been asking questions, observing patterns, gathering exactly the kind of detailed intelligence that appears in this article. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Isabella set down her coffee cup, the porcelain clicking against the saucer with mechanical precision. Salvatore, surely you don't think... I don't think anything yet. I'm gathering facts. He moved around the desk, his presence filling the room like a storm front. Dr. Carter, you have 6 hours of your original deadline remaining. This changes nothing about my expectations, but it changes everything about the consequences of failure. Evelyn felt the trap closing around her. If she found evidence against Isabella now, it would look like retaliation for being accused of the leak. If she failed to find evidence, she'd be blamed for both professional incompetence and betraying the family's trust. The external threat had turned her investigation into a potential suicide mission. With respect, Mr. DeLuca, she said, this leak actually supports my theory. Someone wants attention focused on Nico's illness. That suggests either guilt or a need to control the narrative. Isabella's laugh was brittle as glass. Or it suggests that bringing strangers into our home was a mistake from the beginning. Before Salvatore could respond, Marek appeared in the doorway again. Sir, we have another problem. The reporter, Eliza Voss, she's outside, requesting an interview. Salvatore's jaw clenched. Security. 2 vans, professional equipment. She's not going anywhere soon. The situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Evelyn watched Isabella's face carefully, noting the way her composure cracked for just a moment, a flicker of something that might have been panic or might have been anticipation. The leak had changed the game, but not necessarily in the way everyone assumed. I need to see Nico, Evelyn said suddenly. Right now. Why? Salvatore demanded. Because if someone's trying to control this narrative, they might accelerate their timeline. The safest thing for a child in Nico's condition would be immediate stabilization, but if someone has been systematically weakening him... She didn't need to finish the sentence. In the silence that followed, they all understood the implication. If Nico was being deliberately harmed, the sudden media attention might push his abuser to more desperate measures. Isabella stood abruptly, her movements sharp and agitated. This is ridiculous. I'm going to check on my son myself. No. Evelyn's voice carried an authority that surprised even her. Nobody touches that baby until I've established his current status. For a moment, Isabella's mask slipped completely. Raw fury blazed in her eyes, not the controlled anger of an inconvenienced mother, but the desperate rage of someone whose careful plans were crumbling. You don't give orders in my house, Isabella hissed. When a child's life is at stake, Evelyn replied steadily, I give whatever orders are necessary. Salvatore looked between the 2 women, his expression unreadable. Outside camera flashes strobed against the morning sky as Eliza Voss and her crew documented every detail of the mansion's exterior. The clock was ticking faster now, and everyone in the room knew it. The photographers outside multiplied like vultures sensing carrion. By noon, 3 news vans had joined Eliza Voss's original crew, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metallic flowers, seeking scandal instead of sunlight. Evelyn watched from the library window as reporters positioned themselves at strategic points around the mansion's perimeter, their telephoto lenses trained on every window, every movement behind the iron gates. Salvatore found her there an hour later, his expression darker than the storm clouds gathering over Central Park. He closed the library door behind him with deliberate care, the soft click echoing like a gunshot in the hushed space. The situation has evolved, he said without preamble. My lawyers are fielding calls from 3 major networks requesting interviews. The mayor's office wants to know if there's a public health concern. Child Protective Services is asking pointed questions about my son's medical care. Evelyn turned from the window, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched at his sides. For the first time since entering his house, she was seeing Salvatore DeLuca truly rattled. And, she prompted, and you're coming with me. His voice carried the weight of a decision made against his better judgment. "Tonight, we're attending the Pediatric Research Foundation Gala. You'll be introduced as my son's consulting physician, personally overseeing his specialized care." The implications hit her immediately. "You want me to lie to the medical community? I want you to provide cover for this family while you complete your investigation." His dark eyes were steady, calculating. "The alternative is that you leave now, forfeit your fee, and watch from your queen's apartment as this story destroys not only my reputation, but any chance of getting your sister the treatment she needs." The threat was elegantly delivered but unmistakable. Claire's face flashed through her mind, pale, determined, fighting a battle against her own body that required resources Evelyn couldn't provide alone. "Why?" she asked. "Why not just end this now? Send me away. Weather the scandal." Salvatore moved closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne mixed with something sharper, adrenaline perhaps, or the metallic taste of desperation. "Because you were right about one thing, Dr. Carter. Someone in my house is harming my son, and now with every camera in the city pointed at my front door, I can't afford to handle this quietly. So, you need me to find evidence that will stand up to public scrutiny. I need you to find evidence that will destroy whoever is responsible." His voice dropped to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. "Publicly, completely, and permanently." The alliance he was proposing felt dangerous, a devil's bargain wrapped in expensive cloth and Manhattan power. But as Evelyn considered the alternatives, she realized she had no choice. Alone, she would be crushed by the machinery of wealth and influence that surrounded the De Luca family. Under Salvatore's protection, she might actually have a chance to save Nico and secure Claire's future. "The gala," she said finally. "What exactly are you expecting me to do there? Convince the medical establishment that I'm handling this crisis responsibly. Deflect questions about my son's condition, and observe." His smile was sharp as a blade. "Because whoever leaked this information will be there tonight, and they'll be watching to see how their strategy is playing out. You think the leak came from inside the medical community? I think the leak came from someone who understands exactly how to weaponize a sick child for maximum damage." His expression hardened. "And I think they've underestimated how far I'm willing to go to protect what's mine." That evening, as Evelyn stood before the mirror in an evening gown that cost more than her car, she understood that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She was no longer just investigating Nico's illness. She was now complicit in whatever game the De Luca family was playing. But as she thought of Nico's frightened eyes and Claire's impossible medical bills, she knew she'd make the same choice again. Some battles required choosing the lesser evil. The limousine's leather seats were butter soft against Evelyn's skin, but she felt rigid as steel as they glided through Manhattan traffic toward the gala. Salvatore sat across from her, impeccable in his tailored tuxedo, studying her with the intensity of a predator sizing up potential prey. The partition between them and the driver was raised, creating an intimate cocoon of wealth and whispered confessions. "Tell me about Claire," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through the soft hum of the engine. Evelyn's hand stilled in her lap. "What about her?" "Everything. How she came to live with you. How you became responsible for someone else's child. How a promising medical resident ended up working double shifts in Queens instead of pursuing the prestigious career your grades suggest you were destined for." The questions felt like surgical instruments, precise and invasive. Evelyn stared out the window at the glittering city passing by, each light representing lives far simpler than the one she'd stumbled into. "Claire isn't someone else's child," she said finally. "She's my sister in every way that matters, but not biologically. No. Foster care." The memories came flooding back. A cramped apartment in the Bronx, social workers with tired eyes and clipboard smiles, a parade of temporary homes that never quite became permanent. Claire had been 11 when they met, Evelyn 16, both aging out of a system that had long since given up on finding them families. "We found each other," she said simply. Salvatore leaned forward, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "And when she got sick, I promised her I'd find a way to fix it." Evelyn's voice carried the weight of sleepless nights, spent researching experimental treatments, of phone calls to specialists who charged consultation fees she couldn't afford. That promise is why I'm sitting in this car with you instead of walking away from your family's problems. But it's not just about money, is it? His tone was deceptively casual. You could have chosen a more lucrative specialty. Plastic surgery, perhaps dermatology. Fields where your skills would command premium fees without the emotional toll. Evelyn met his stare directly. Some people are motivated by money. Others are motivated by purpose. And which are you, Dr. Carter? Before she could answer, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Isabella's name appeared on the screen, and Salvatore's expression darkened as he declined it. The third call in 10 minutes. Your wife seems anxious tonight, Evelyn observed. My wife is anxious every night. His voice carried years of accumulated fatigue. Isabella doesn't handle uncertainty well. She prefers controlled environments. Is that why you travel so much for business? The question slipped out before Evelyn could stop it, and she immediately regretted the personal nature of it. But instead of anger, she saw something unexpected in Salvatore's expression. Vulnerability, quickly masked but unmistakable. Isabella and I married for practical reasons, he said after a long pause. Her family's connections in Europe, my need for a certain social standing. We understood each other's requirements. But understanding someone isn't the same as loving them. And Nico? Nico was supposed to. Complete the picture. Give Isabella the purpose she'd been searching for. Give our marriage the foundation it lacked. He rubbed his temple, a gesture so human it startled her. Instead, he became another obligation she couldn't fulfill. The limousine pulled up to the Pierre Hotel, its entrance blazing with camera flashes, as society photographers documented the arrival of New York's medical and philanthropic elite. Through the tinted windows, Evelyn could see reporters scanning each vehicle, hoping to spot the mysterious DeLuca family at the center of the day's scandal. Last chance to change your mind, Salvatore said, straightening his tie with mechanical precision. Once we walk through those doors together, you're committed. There's no backing down, no claiming innocence. No returning to your simple life in Queens. Evelyn thought of Nico's frightened eyes, of Claire waiting for news about treatment options, of the small dropper bottle she'd seen Isabella use in the darkened nursery. Some choices felt inevitable, as if they'd been made long before the moment arrived. I understand. Do you? He leaned closer, and she could smell his cologne, expensive and subtle. Because I suspect there are things about yourself you haven't told me, Dr. Carter, secrets that might complicate our arrangement. Her pulse quickened, such as why a doctor with your obvious talent for pattern recognition and diagnostic insight is working in a community clinic instead of a prestigious hospital. His smile was sharp as winter wind, such as what really happened during your residency to derail such a promising career. The limousine door opened, and camera flashes exploded like artificial lightning. Salvatore stepped out first, extending his hand to help her from the vehicle. As she placed her fingers in his, she realized he'd been interrogating her not to understand her motivations, but to map her vulnerabilities. He knew her secrets, and now, surrounded by Manhattan's elite with cameras documenting their every move, she was completely at his mercy. The Pierre Hotel's ballroom glittered with Manhattan's medical elite, surgeons whose hands were worth millions, researchers whose discoveries had changed the world, philanthropists whose checkbooks could fund entire hospitals. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across silk gowns and tailored tuxedos, while waiters moved like ghosts through the crowd, carrying champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's weekly salary. Evelyn stood beside Salvatore, playing the role of devoted consultant physician while her eyes scanned the room for threats she couldn't yet identify. The conversations around them buzzed with the undercurrent of the morning's scandal. Sympathetic inquiries about Nico's health mixed with barely concealed curiosity about the family's private struggles. Dr. Carter, a familiar voice interrupted her observations. She turned to find Dr. Marcus Webb approaching, immaculate in his evening wear, his pale eyes sharp with interest. What a surprise to find you here. I wasn't aware you joined the DeLuca medical team. Mr. DeLuca requested a consultation, she replied carefully. How generous of him to provide you with such an elevated opportunity. Webb's smile carried the same condescension she'd encountered in the hospital elevator. Though I'm curious about the timing, just this morning, I received quite an interesting call. Salvatore's attention sharpened, his body language shifting almost imperceptibly toward predatory alertness. From whom? A journalist named Eliza Voss. She seemed remarkably well informed about young Nico's medical history. New details about his care that would only be available to someone with intimate knowledge of the case. The accusation hung in the perfumed air like poison gas. Evelyn felt the weight of nearby conversations shifting, society matrons and medical luminaries tuning their attention to the drama unfolding in their midst. "What exactly are you suggesting, Dr. Webb?" Salvatore's voice carried the kind of quiet menace that had built his empire. "I'm suggesting that bringing outsiders into sensitive medical situations sometimes leads to complications." Webb's gaze flicked to Evelyn. "Particularly when those outsiders might have their own motivations for seeking publicity." Before Evelyn could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. The sender was Sophia. "Emergency, come home now. Found something you need to see." She showed the message to Salvatore, watching his expression darken as he read it. But before either could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Salvatore, darling." Isabella De Luca materialized beside them like a vision in midnight blue silk, her smile perfectly composed despite the strain around her eyes. "I've been looking everywhere for you." Her presence changed the dynamic instantly. Webb straightened, his antagonistic posture shifting to something more deferential. Other guests nodded politely, their expressions carefully neutral. But Evelyn caught the micro-expressions, the way Isabella's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted her diamond earrings, the pulse visible at her throat, the barely controlled panic behind her practiced charm. "Isabella," Salvatore's voice was coolly formal, "I thought you were staying home with Nico tonight." "Nora Hayes is watching him. She insisted I needed the break." Isabella's laugh was musical, but strained. "Besides, I couldn't let you face the vultures alone." Dr. Webb excused himself with elaborate courtesy, but not before giving Evelyn a look that promised their conversation wasn't finished. As he melted back into the crowd, Isabella moved closer to her husband, her perfume carrying that same medicinal undertone Evelyn had noticed in the nursery. "We need to leave," Isabella whispered, her composure finally cracking. "There's been a development about the nurse." "What kind of development?" Salvatore demanded. "Not here." Isabella's eyes darted around the ballroom, noting the faces turned in their direction, the phones discreetly recording their interaction. "Please, just trust me." The drive back to the mansion was tense, filled with Isabella's nervous chatter about the gala, the beautiful dresses, the generous donations to pediatric research. But underneath her words, Evelyn sensed deeper currents, fear, guilt, and something that might have been relief. They arrived to find Marek waiting in the foyer, his expression grim. "We have a problem. Nora Hayes has been asking questions about medication schedules, about who has access to the nursery, about the family's medical history." "So?" Isabella's voice was sharp. "She's a nurse. That's her job." "Her questions weren't medical, Mrs. De Luca. They were investigative. She's been documenting everything, making copies of records, taking photographs." Marek's pale eyes fixed on Isabella with uncomfortable intensity. "She's working with someone on the outside." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Nora Hayes, the trusted night nurse, the medical professional who'd been caring for Nico during his most vulnerable hours, had been gathering evidence. But evidence of what? And for whom? "Where is she now?" Salvatore demanded. "Gone. Left 20 minutes ago. But she took something with her." Marek pulled out his phone, displaying a security camera image, one of Mrs. De Luca's prescription bottles. Isabella's face went white as porcelain. In the camera's grainy footage, Nora Hayes could be seen slipping something small into her bag, something that glinted like glass in the nursery's soft lighting. "What medication?" Evelyn asked, though she already suspected the answer. Isabella's silence was damning, but it was Sophia who appeared in the doorway, holding a small dropper bottle, who provided the final piece of the puzzle. I found this hidden in the medicine cabinet, Sophia said quietly. It's labeled as baby vitamins, but... She handed the bottle to Evelyn. It doesn't smell right. Evelyn uncapped the bottle, immediately recognizing the sweet medicinal odor she'd detected on Nico's breath. One drop on her finger, touched to her tongue, confirmed her worst fears. Sedatives, concentrated enough to keep an infant in a state of constant lethargy. The real threat hadn't been external pressure or media attention. It had been inside the house all along, disguised as care. The silence in Salvatore's study was suffocating as Evelyn held the dropper bottle up to the light, watching the clear liquid catch the lamplight like liquid poison. Isabella sat rigid in her chair, her perfect composure finally shattered, while Marek positioned himself by the door like a sentinel guarding against escape. "Diazepam," Evelyn said quietly, setting the bottle on the massive desk. Concentrated to roughly 10 times the normal pediatric dose, even a few drops would keep an infant sedated for hours, suppress appetite, cause the exact symptoms Nico's been experiencing. Salvatore's face had gone stone cold, but his hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he reached for his phone. "I'm calling the police. Wait." Evelyn's voice cut through his fury like a scalpel. "Before you destroy everything, think about what Nora Hayes actually took. She has one bottle of prescription medication with Isabella's name on it. No proof of how it was used, no documented evidence of administration, no medical records linking it to Nico's condition. She has enough to destroy us," Isabella whispered, her voice hollow. "She has enough to raise questions, but questions aren't convictions." Evelyn began pacing, her mind working through the layers of evidence and counter-evidence like a chess player seeing moves ahead. The real question is why she took only one bottle. Why not photograph the medical records? Why not document the feeding schedules Sophia kept? Why leave behind the most damaging evidence? Marek's expression sharpened. "You think she's working with someone? I know she is. The leak to Eliza Voss was too precisely timed, too strategically positioned. Someone wanted this story to break exactly when it did, exactly how it did." Evelyn stopped pacing, facing Salvatore directly. "Nora Hayes isn't trying to expose Isabella. She's trying to control the narrative." "For what purpose?" "For the same purpose. Anyone in New York wants to control a story involving your family. Leverage." She pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. "Sophia, I need you to check something in Nico's nursery. Look for any recording devices, anything that doesn't belong there." The response came within minutes. "Found small camera hidden in teddy bear. Very professional." Evelyn showed the text to Salvatore, watching comprehension dawn in his dark eyes. "They've been recording everything. Isabella's night feedings, our conversations. Probably even this meeting if they managed to plant devices elsewhere." "But why?" Isabella's voice was desperate. "What do they want?" Before anyone could answer, Salvatore's phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but when he answered, the voice was familiar. "Mr. De Luca, this is Eliza Voss. I believe we need to talk." Salvatore activated the speakerphone, his expression murderous. "About what?" "About the evidence that's going to break tomorrow morning if we don't reach an understanding. Video evidence of your wife deliberately sedating your infant son. Medical records showing a pattern of systematic abuse. Sources within your own household willing to testify." The room went dead silent. Isabella made a sound like a wounded animal, while Marek's hand moved instinctively toward his concealed weapon. "What do you want?" Salvatore's voice was deadly quiet. "A story. An exclusive interview about your family's charitable foundation, your plans for pediatric medical research, your commitment to child welfare. Plus a significant donation to fund my investigation into medical negligence in elite healthcare facilities. Blackmail. Journalism. I'm offering you the chance to control how this story is told instead of letting it destroy you." Eliza's voice carried the confidence of someone holding all the cards. "You have 2 hours to decide." The line went dead, leaving them in a silence that felt like the aftermath of an explosion. "She has us," Isabella whispered. "No," Evelyn said, her mind racing through possibilities. "She has leverage, but she's made a critical error. She's assuming we'll react emotionally instead of strategically." "What are you thinking?" Salvatore asked. "I'm thinking about patterns, about the timing of Nico's symptoms, about when they started, about who was present for each escalation." She turned to Isabella, her voice gentle but implacable. "I need you to tell me the truth about something, and lives depend on your honesty. When did you first start giving Nico the sedatives?" Isabella's composure crumbled completely. 6 weeks ago, after he wouldn't stop crying. After Salvatore said maybe we should get another nanny, someone more experienced. I wanted him to be peaceful, to be the baby I could love instead of the one who made me feel like a failure. And Nora Hayes was working here then? Yes, she said she understood, that some mothers needed help managing difficult babies. She even suggested the medication, said it was perfectly safe in small doses. The final piece clicked into place. Evelyn felt the familiar rush of diagnostic clarity, the moment when all the scattered symptoms aligned into a coherent picture. "Nora Hayes didn't discover the abuse," she said quietly. "She orchestrated it. She manipulated a vulnerable new mother into medicating her child, documented the process, and now she's using it for extortion." She turned to Salvatore, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "I can prove it. But first, we need to save your son." The next 18 hours shattered the carefully constructed world of the De Luca family like a sledgehammer through stained glass. By dawn, news vans had multiplied outside the mansion gates, their satellite dishes creating a metallic forest of media hunger. The morning headlines screamed accusations that would have destroyed lesser families. "Billionaire's wife drugged baby." "Inside the De Luca scandal. Nurse whistleblower exposes elite child abuse." Evelyn stood in Salvatore's study, watching him field calls from lawyers, publicists, and board members whose voices carried the sharp edge of panic even through speakerphone. His empire, built on precision, control, and unshakable reputation, was crumbling in real time. "The Pediatric Foundation is hemorrhaging donors," his chief legal counsel reported from the speaker. 3 board members have resigned since the story broke. The mayor's office is demanding a full investigation. "And our other holdings?" Salvatore's voice remained steady, but Evelyn could see the toll in the way he gripped his coffee cup, the slight tremor in his hands. "Stock prices down 12% and falling. The European partners are requesting emergency meetings. The banks are nervous." Isabella sat in the corner like a broken doll, still in yesterday's evening gown, her perfect hair disheveled for the first time since Evelyn had known her. She hadn't spoken in hours, just stared at her hands while the world collapsed around them. "Mrs. De Luca needs medical attention," Evelyn said quietly when the call ended. "She's showing signs of acute psychological distress." "She's showing signs of guilt," Salvatore replied coldly, "as she should. She's showing signs of someone who was manipulated by a professional predator." Evelyn moved to Isabella's side, noting the rapid pulse visible at her throat, the way her breathing had become shallow and irregular. "Nora Hayes is a specialist in psychological manipulation. She identified Isabella's vulnerabilities and exploited them systematically. That doesn't excuse, it explains." Evelyn's voice carried the authority of medical expertise. "Isabella needs psychiatric evaluation and treatment, not condemnation, and Nico needs his mother recovered, not destroyed." Before Salvatore could respond, Marek appeared in the doorway, his expression grimmer than usual. "We have a problem. Dr. Webb has called a press conference. He's claiming that the family's medical team was compromised from the beginning, that proper protocols were ignored, that outside influences," his gaze flicked to Evelyn, "led to a breakdown in professional standards." The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Webb was positioning himself as the whistleblowing hero while painting Evelyn as the incompetent outsider whose involvement had enabled the abuse to continue. It was elegant character assassination wrapped in professional concern. "He's covering his own liability," as Evelyn realized. "If he can prove that bringing me into the case compromised Nico's care, he shields himself from malpractice claims. Can he succeed? If the narrative becomes about my qualifications instead of Nora Hayes's manipulation, yes, he has the credentials, the institutional support, the professional standing to make it stick." Salvatore's phone buzzed with an incoming text. His face darkened as he read it. "Claire's treatment has been suspended. The hospital is citing irregularities in payment arrangements and demanding full payment up front before continuing her care. The message was clear. Their enemies weren't just attacking the DeLuca family, they were targeting everyone connected to them. Evelyn felt the walls closing in, the careful alliance she'd built crumbling under coordinated assault. "They're trying to isolate us," she said. "Cut off our support systems, our resources, our credibility. Make us so desperate we'll accept whatever terms they offer. And if we don't? Then Claire dies, Isabella faces criminal charges, Nico goes into state custody, and you lose everything you've built." The brutal calculus of their situation was inescapable. They're not just asking for money or interviews anymore. They want total surrender. Sophia appeared in the doorway, her face pale with fear. "The reporters, they are asking about me now, about my immigration status, about my family. They know things. Personal things." The scope of the attack was becoming clear. This wasn't random opportunism. It was a coordinated campaign designed to destroy everyone who might challenge the official narrative. Nora Hayes and her allies had prepared for every contingency except one. "We fight back," Salvatore said quietly, his voice carrying the steel that had built his fortune. "Not with lawyers or publicists or damage control. We fight back with the truth." "The truth won't be enough," Evelyn warned, "not against this level of coordination." "Then we make it enough." He stood, straightening his tie with mechanical precision. "You said you could prove Nora Hayes orchestrated this. Do it. Whatever resources you need, whatever risks we have to take, whatever laws we have to bend, do it. And if it destroys what's left of your reputation?" "My reputation was built on control." His smile was sharp as broken glass. "It's time to show them what happens when that control becomes a weapon." The cost of their alliance had become clear. Everything they'd built, everyone they'd protected, every certainty they'd relied upon was now in jeopardy. But in the ruins of their former lives, something new was emerging. A partnership forged in desperation and tempered by absolute necessity. Either they would save each other, or they would burn together. Evelyn found Salvatore in Nico's nursery at 3 in the morning, sitting in the rocking chair beside his son's crib, his tailored shirt wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. The baby slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. No sedatives, no artificial calm, just the natural rest of a healthy infant, finally free from chemical imprisonment. "He's beautiful when he's not being drugged," she said softly, stepping into the room. Salvatore didn't look up. "I failed him. My own son, and I failed to protect him from the people I brought into his life to keep him safe. You failed to see a threat you had no reason to expect. That's human, not criminal." Evelyn pulled up the chair Sophia usually occupied during night feedings. "But now you have a choice about what comes next." "What do you mean?" "I mean the reconstruction of this family starts with clarity about who's really in charge of Nico's care." Her voice carried a quiet authority that made him finally look at her. No more hired consultants brought in to validate predetermined conclusions. No more medical decisions made for public relations reasons. No more anyone having access to that baby without my explicit approval. Salvatore's eyebrows rose. "You're giving me ultimatums. I'm setting professional boundaries that should have existed from the beginning." She leaned forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I know what Nico needs medically. You know what this family needs strategically. But those needs have to be balanced, not compromised. And if I refuse, then you handle this crisis without me, and Claire dies while I watch from whatever emergency room will still hire me after Webb destroys my reputation." The brutal honesty hung between them like a blade. "So I'm not bluffing, Salvatore. I won't be anyone's puppet, not yours, not Webb's, not the media's." For a long moment, the only sound was Nico's soft breathing and the distant hum of traffic from Fifth Avenue. When Salvatore spoke again, his voice carried a respect she hadn't heard before. "What do you need?" "First, Isabella gets proper psychiatric treatment. Real therapy, not damage control coaching. She was victimized by Nora Hayes and she needs professional help to understand that. Done. Second, we reconstruct the timeline of Nora Hayes' employment. Every reference she provided, every credential she claimed, every previous position. Someone trained her to identify vulnerable families and exploit them. I'll have my investigators on it within the hour. Third, Claire's treatment resumes immediately. Full funding, no strings attached, no leverage held over my head. Her voice softened slightly. I can't make clear medical decisions if I'm worried about my sister dying. Salvatore pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. My financial manager will have the funds transferred to Johns Hopkins before business hours. The treatment will continue without interruption. The speed of his response surprised her. No negotiation, no conditions, no attempt to maintain control over her motivations. Just immediate action to remove the pressure that had been used to manipulate her. Why? She asked. Because you just proved something I've suspected since you walked into my house. He stood, moving to the window that overlooked Central Park. You're not motivated by money or fear or ambition. You're motivated by protecting the people you care about. That makes you more valuable than any consultant I've ever hired. And more dangerous to your control. And more trustworthy when that control fails. He turned back to her, his expression serious. I built my fortune by surrounding myself with people who needed something from me. It made them predictable, manageable, but it also made them vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation we've been subjected to. You're saying you want partners instead of employees? I'm saying I want people around my son who can't be bought, threatened, or compromised. His smile was rueful. It's a novel concept for me. As if sensing the shift in the room's energy, Nico stirred in his crib, making the soft sounds of a baby beginning to wake. Evelyn moved to check on him, noting the healthy color in his cheeks, the alertness in his eyes when they opened. "Hello, little one," she whispered, and for the first time Nico smiled, a genuine infant smile unmarred by chemical lethargy. "He likes you," Salvatore observed. "He trusts me. That's different." She gently stroked Nico's cheek. Trust has to be earned through consistent actions, not demanded through authority. Is that another condition? That's a promise. I'll earn his trust and yours by keeping both of you safe, but I'll only work with people who understand that safety requires truth, even when truth is uncomfortable. Salvatore moved to stand beside her at the crib. Then we start with the truth about Nora Hayes. And we don't stop until everyone who participated in this conspiracy is exposed. For the first time since entering the DeLuca mansion, Evelyn felt like she was working with an ally rather than navigating around an obstacle. The partnership she demanded was forming, built not on desperation or leverage, but on mutual respect and shared commitment to protecting the innocent. "One more thing," she said, as they prepared to leave the nursery. "When this is over, you and Isabella need to decide if you want to be married to each other or just business partners raising a child together. Nico deserves parents who know the difference." Salvatore paused in the doorway, his hand on the light switch. "And if we can't figure that out, then you'll need more help than I can provide. But at least you'll be making that decision honestly, without external manipulation." The light dimmed, leaving them in the soft glow of the night light, surrounded by the peaceful breathing of a child finally safe in his own home. The war room Salvatore had assembled in his study looked like a cross between a corporate boardroom and a detective's evidence wall. Photographs, medical records, financial documents, and phone logs covered every available surface, while 3 laptops displayed surveillance footage from multiple angles. Evelyn stood before the main evidence board, connecting threads with the precision of a surgeon mapping arteries. "Nora Hayes doesn't exist," she announced to the assembled group. Salvatore, Marek, Sophia, and Ethan Brooks, the forensic accountant Salvatore had flown in from London. "The credentials are fabricated, the references lead to shell companies, and the nursing license was issued based on forged documentation." Ethan looked up from his financial analysis. "The money trail is even more interesting. Payments to Nora Hayes were automatically transferred to an account controlled by something called Orloff Medical Consulting, the same company that's been funding Eliza Voss's investigative journalism for the past 2 years. The name hit like a thunderbolt. Orloff, Isabella's family name. The pharmaceutical empire that had arranged her marriage to Salvatore, the European connections that had seemed like such an advantage when they'd first met. "Constantine," Salvatore breathed, his face going ashen. "Isabella's father." "But why?" Sophia asked, her voice bewildered. Why would he hurt his own grandson? Because Nico was never the target, Evelyn realized, the final pieces clicking into place. Isabella was. Constantine needed a way to control his daughter, to maintain influence over the American expansion of his pharmaceutical business. A traumatized, dependent daughter was more useful than a strong, independent one. Marek pulled up a new file on his laptop. I traced the psychological profile used to recruit Nora Hayes. It's incredibly sophisticated, designed specifically to identify and manipulate women suffering from postpartum depression and maternal anxiety. Constantine had Isabella psychologically profiled. Salvatore's voice carried deadly quiet. More than that, he orchestrated her breakdown, the difficult pregnancy, the feeding problems, the constant criticism disguised as concern, all designed to make her vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation Nora Hayes provided. The room fell silent as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. This wasn't opportunistic abuse, it was psychological warfare conducted by a father against his own child, using her infant son as leverage. We have enough evidence to destroy him, Salvatore said finally. Financial records, psychological manipulation, conspiracy to commit child abuse. No. Evelyn's voice cut through his anger. We don't destroy him. We expose him. There's a difference. She moved to the laptop displaying Eliza Voss's recent articles, highlighting patterns that had taken her hours to identify. Look at the timing of her investigations. Every family she's targeted has one thing in common. They've refused partnerships with Orlov Pharmaceuticals. She's not a journalist. She's industrial espionage disguised as advocacy. So we discredit her? We give her a better story. Evelyn pulled up the evidence they'd gathered on Orlov's other victims. Families whose children had been manipulated, mothers who'd been psychologically broken, fathers who'd been driven to financial ruin. Konstantin Orlov has been using sick children as weapons against their own parents for years. That's the real scandal. Salvatore's phone rang. The caller ID showed Eliza Voss's number, but when he answered, a different voice spoke. Older, heavily accented, coldly familiar. Salvatore, I believe you've been investigating my employees. Constantine. Salvatore's voice was perfectly controlled. How thoughtful of you to call. I'm calling to offer you one final opportunity to be reasonable. Release a statement confirming that your wife suffered from postpartum psychosis, that appropriate medical intervention has been arranged, and that you're grateful for the media attention that led to proper treatment. And in return? In return, the evidence of your wife's child abuse disappears, your business relationships remain intact, and your son grows up with parents instead of visiting hours at a psychiatric facility. The threat was elegantly delivered, but unmistakable. Constantine was offering to bury the truth in exchange for complete submission to his version of events. Evelyn caught Salvatore's eye and nodded. It was time. I have a counter-proposal, Constantine, Salvatore said, activating the speakerphone. You have 30 minutes to withdraw from all American business ventures, dissolve Orlov Medical Consulting, and fund a foundation for families affected by medical manipulation. In return, I don't release the evidence I've gathered about your systematic exploitation of vulnerable families. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. When Constantine spoke again, his voice carried the chill of Siberian winter. You have no idea what you're threatening, Salvatore. I'm threatening to expose you as the monster you are. Salvatore's voice remained steady, but Evelyn could see the cost of the confrontation in the tension around his eyes. I'm threatening to show the world that you've been using sick children as weapons against their own parents. And you believe the world will care about a few spoiled rich families having their feelings hurt? I believe the world will care about systematic child abuse conducted by a pharmaceutical company with global reach. Evelyn leaned toward the phone. Hello, Constantine. This is Dr. Carter. I think you should know that everything you've said in the last 5 minutes has been recorded and will be included in the evidence package we're preparing. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, laughter. Cold, bitter, but somehow defeated. Clever girl. My daughter chose her allies well, even if she didn't know she was choosing them. The connection ended with a soft click. Within hours, Konstantin Orlov announced his retirement from active business management, citing health concerns. Orlov Medical Consulting quietly dissolved, its assets transferred to a victim compensation fund. Eliza Voss published her last investigation, a stunning exposé of pharmaceutical manipulation that won her the Pulitzer Prize and destroyed her former patron. The war was over. Truth had won. But the victory felt hollow until Evelyn looked at Nico, sleeping peacefully in his father's arms, finally safe in a house where love mattered more than control. 1 year later, the DeLuca mansion had transformed from a fortress of secrets into something that finally resembled a home. Sunlight streamed through windows that were no longer shrouded in the paranoia of surveillance, and the sound of genuine laughter echoed through halls that had once known only whispered conspiracies and careful performances. Evelyn stood in what had been Salvatore's intimidating study, now converted into a bright pediatric consultation room where she saw patients 3 days a week, children of families who couldn't afford Manhattan's elite medical care, brought to her by a foundation that bore Nico's name, but served hundreds. The irony wasn't lost on her. The room where she'd once been interrogated and threatened had become a place of healing. Dr. Evelyn, Nico's voice carried the pure joy of a toddler who knew he was loved. At 19 months, he was everything a healthy child should be, curious, energetic, completely free of the chemical fog that had once clouded his early months. He toddled into the room carrying a stuffed elephant, his dark eyes bright with intelligence that had never been dimmed. "Hello, little prince," she said, scooping him up and spinning him around until he giggled with delight. "Are you ready for your checkup?" Behind him came Sophia, now bearing the official title of Head of Childcare Services for the Nico DeLuca Foundation, her immigration status permanently secured and her salary reflecting her true value rather than her vulnerability. "He's been asking for you all morning," Sophia said with a smile that had replaced the fearful tension she'd carried for so long. Isabella entered last, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had done the hard work of healing. 6 months of intensive therapy had stripped away the brittle perfection that had once defined her, revealing a woman who was finally learning to be a mother instead of performing motherhood. Her relationship with Nico was still rebuilding, but it was real now, messy, imperfect, and genuine. "How are you feeling about the interview today?" Evelyn asked as she conducted Nico's routine examination. "Nervous, grateful, ready." Isabella's voice carried none of its former artifice. "Eliza says the documentary will help other families recognize the signs of psychological manipulation. If sharing our story prevents even one child from going through what Nico did." Eliza Voss had indeed won the Pulitzer Prize for her exposé of pharmaceutical manipulation, but her greatest achievement had been transforming herself from unwitting weapon to genuine advocate. The documentary she was producing about the DeLuca case would air next month, focusing not on scandal but on recovery, resilience, and the power of truth to heal. "Any word from Marek?" Evelyn asked. "He called this morning from Prague. Konstantin's trial is proceeding smoothly. The evidence we provided has led to charges in 7 countries. Justice may be slow, but it's thorough." Marek Sokolov had proven to be the most surprising transformation of all. The man who had once intimidated visitors into submission now worked internationally, helping other families escape similar conspiracies. His network of contacts, previously used for surveillance, had become an early warning system, protecting vulnerable families from psychological predators. Salvatore appeared in the doorway, no longer the coldly controlling billionaire who had first challenged her competence. Fatherhood had humanized him in ways that business success never could. "Dr. Carter, your 1 o'clock appointment has arrived. The Castellanos. Their daughter has the sleep issues we discussed." He still carried authority effortlessly, but now it served protection rather than domination. Their partnership had evolved beyond the desperate alliance born of crisis. They were genuine collaborators now, their skills complementing each other in service of healing families rather than building empires. "Before I forget," Salvatore continued, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket, "I believe this conversation is overdue." Evelyn's breath caught. They had been dancing around their feelings for months, their relationship deepening slowly as they rebuilt not just their professional partnership, but something far more personal. Trust, it turned out, was an excellent foundation for love. "Evelyn Carter," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet intensity she remembered from their first confrontation, but transformed by tenderness. "You saved my son. You saved my family. You saved me from becoming the kind of man my father-in-law was." He opened the box, revealing a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious, a choice that showed how well he'd come to know her. "Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of your partnership?" Before she could answer, Nico clapped his hands together and declared, "Mama Evelyn," with the certainty of a child who understood love, even when adults complicated it with words. "Yes," she said, the word carrying all the weight of the journey that had brought them to this moment. "But with one condition." Salvatore's eyebrow rose in familiar challenge. "Name it." "No more secrets, no more games, no more tests." She took his hand, feeling the calluses that came from learning to be a hands-on father rather than a distant provider. Just truth. Always truth. "Always truth," he agreed, slipping the ring onto her finger. As he kissed her, surrounded by the family they had fought to heal and the mission they would continue to serve, Evelyn understood that some victories were worth everything they had cost. She had entered this house as an outsider fighting for survival. She was leaving it as a queen who had chosen her kingdom wisely. Thanks for watching. Hope today's story was fun. Subscribe so you won't miss the next one, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video.